All right, let's jump right into this explainer and systematically peel back the layers of a deeply ingrained human behavior that we're all familiar with: virtue signaling. Now, we see this absolutely everywhere online, right? People making completely sure that you know they hold the most caring and correct opinions. But rather than getting caught up in the endless cultural debates, we are strictly going to look at the fascinating psychological machinery running quietly behind the screen. Specifically, we're zeroing in on the hidden cognitive biases and the evolutionary survival tactics that basically compel us to broadcast our goodness to the entire world.
To do this, we'll follow a clear roadmap. We're covering the initial urge to look good, how we actively manage our moral image, the evolutionary survival roots of all this, a really surprising connection to the Dunning-Kruger effect, and finally, how tech companies weaponize these exact virtues.
Section 1. The urge to look good, the surface. Let's start with the surface-level behavior we all recognize.
Seriously, have you ever wondered why we subconsciously tailor our actions for an invisible audience? Even when we're totally alone in our rooms, lit only by the glow of a phone, we often behave as though a panel of strict judges is constantly evaluating our moral worth. Well, this isn't an accident. It's actually a highly predictable mental shortcut. And understanding this fundamental urge forms the absolute baseline of why we signal our virtues to others in the first place.
Okay, so the core psychological anchor of virtue signaling is something called the social desirability bias. Basically, when faced with a choice, our brains frequently prioritize aligning with collective values over strict honesty. Think about taking a personality test. We systematically overreport our noble traits and conveniently hide our flaws. Why do we do that? Because appearing respectable and safe to the group is a deeply rooted biological priority for the human brain. It is the hidden engine driving so much of what we share online.
And this naturally leads to a more specific mental shortcut known as the courtesy bias. See, sometimes virtue signaling isn't about loud, flashy grandstanding on the internet. Sometimes it's just softening our true beliefs, simply to maintain group harmony. Think of nodding along to an opinion at a dinner party just to avoid offending anyone at the table. You aren't necessarily changing your mind, but you provide the socially correct opinion as a protective measure for your own social standing.
Moving on to Section 2, managing your moral image, the mechanisms. Let's see how this passive desire to look good evolves into actively managing our reputations.
We definitely don't do this randomly. We use a pretty sophisticated toolkit of specific cognitive biases to protect our self-image. It's essentially strategic reputation management, playing out in our everyday interactions. We're going to look closely at 3 major biases that act as the pillars of this moral management.
First up is the halo effect. By intentionally signaling a single virtuous trait, like showing exactly how much you care about a specific social issue, you're attempting to trigger the spillover effect in whoever is watching. If people see you as deeply caring, that positive impression biologically spills over into other areas. Suddenly, they subconsciously assume you're also highly competent, honest, and incredibly intelligent. It's honestly an astoundingly efficient way to boost your overall social stock with very minimal effort.
But here is where our brains really start to trick us, thanks to the false uniqueness effect. A person might signal their virtue loudly because they mistakenly believe their good behavior is incredibly rare. They vastly underestimate how many other people are doing the exact same socially desirable things. Because they think their empathy or their activism is super uncommon, their own signaling feels incredibly special, urgent, and entirely necessary to them.
Now this one is absolutely fascinating. Virtue signaling acts exactly like a moral bank account through the moral credential effect. By building up these public credentials, we unconsciously create a protective shield for ourselves. It literally allows us to make questionable, risky, or entirely selfish choices later on, insulated from heavy criticism. Why? Because we feel we've already clearly established our virtuous baseline with the group. Basically, we feel we've earned a free pass.
It's also really interesting how culture shapes this bias. In highly individualist cultures, we lean heavily on the self-serving bias, claiming loud, personal credit for our virtues and successes. But if you look at collectivist cultures, the strategy flips to a self-effacing bias. There, people demonstrate their virtue by showing extreme modesty and attributing their success entirely to the group support. The overarching reputation management goal is exactly the same, only the specific strategy adapts to fit the culture.
Section 3. The evolutionary survival roots, the foundation. Let's peel back another layer to uncover why we are hardwired for this.
This behavior isn't just a byproduct of modern digital vanity. It goes all the way back to an ancestral, deeply ingrained survival tactic.
For the vast majority of human history, our survival didn't just depend on finding food or shelter, it quite literally depended on our standing within the tribe. Simply put, if the tribe didn't like you, you were in serious trouble.
In our harsh ancestral environments, failing to quickly and clearly signal your cooperativeness could easily mean being cast out of the group. And out on the savannah, isolation meant getting eaten. So we evolved this vital mental shortcut called the social exchange heuristic. We act as if we are always being watched. We fiercely signal our pro-social nature because the ancestral cost of not doing so was death. Our modern brains are literally still running this ancient survival software.
Because we fundamentally want to stay in the tribe's good graces, we constantly fall prey to the bandwagon effect bias. We signal a specific virtue simply because absolutely everyone else is doing it. Popularity becomes our brain's mental shortcut for morality. If the loud majority values something, adopting it ensures our safety and inclusion, entirely bypassing any sort of logical, independent analysis of the issue itself.
All right, Section 4, the Dunning-Kruger connection, the blind spot. Let's look at how this primal desire intersects with a profound lack of self-awareness. You've likely heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect in terms of intelligence or workplace skills, right? It's the bias where unqualified people confidently rate themselves as above average. Well, this applies heavily to our sense of morality, too. It perfectly explains why some individuals loudly signal virtues they objectively don't possess. They genuinely, yet falsely, overestimate their own moral competence and depth of character.
And this creates a really dangerous overconfidence trap. In the modern realm of virtue signaling, the individuals who are actually the most ignorant of the complex nuances of a moral issue are very often the ones signaling their stance the absolute loudest. Why is that? Because their very lack of knowledge entirely prevents them from experiencing the healthy self-doubt that would normally temper their confidence. They simply don't know what they don't know.
Furthermore, this powerful bias causes what we call metacognitive blindness. Because these individuals lack the internal tools to accurately evaluate themselves, they also can't recognize valid, helpful moral critiques from others. They honestly have no idea that their desperate attempts to trigger a halo effect are totally transparent to everyone else in the room. So when challenged, their signaling just becomes a stubborn defensive shield to deflect any real feedback.
Finally, Section 5, weaponizing the virtue, the exploitation. Let's look at how modern choice architects use these biases against us. Tech companies and digital marketers understand the social desirability bias perfectly, and they routinely weaponize it in our digital interfaces through a manipulative dark pattern known as confirm shaming. They use emotive, carefully crafted language to make you feel actively guilty for not selecting the choice that financially benefits them. They are coldly exploiting your inherent desire to be seen as a good and caring person. We have all seen pop-ups exactly like this. When you are forced to click a button that essentially says, "I am a bad person who hates the earth," just to opt out of a marketing newsletter, your evolved urge to appear virtuous is being directly exploited. They are hijacking your deeply ingrained evolutionary psychology just to bump up their daily email conversion metrics. It's wild. And on a much broader scale, major social platforms establish egotistic norms. By cleverly tying certain behaviors and opinions to high visibility and social reward, these massive digital ecosystems heavily leverage our ancient ancestral fear of ostracism. They systematically herd us into adopting their preferred corporate values, essentially forcing us to signal specific virtues just to stay digitally safe and relevant.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. We are deeply programmed to want to look good, driven by ancient survival heuristics, often completely blind to our own overconfidence, and constantly exploited by the tech we use every single day. Knowing all of that, how will you perceive the next loud digital signal you see? Because once you spot the psychological machinery operating quietly behind the screen, the entire internet looks completely different. Thank you for joining me on this explainer.